And there's a benchmark for me in terms of a relationship with a player. When the first time that they come and they disagree with me, I'm like, this is amazing, because they finally have the courage to say, I don't think that's going to work. Or what if we tried it this way? Or coach, we're really tired. Is there a way that we can shorten up practices this week? Like, they know that I love practice more than anything else, but for them to find that place where they don't necessarily just agree or just say what they think I want to hear, that's a milestone, and from that point on, I know that I've got a person that I can really trust because they're willing to be honest with me, even if it's not what I want to hear.
Welcome back to another episode of The Pursuit of Purpose. My name is Chris Kiefer, and today I am here with Coach Nate Sanderson, who is from Iowa, and he is a part of a group that's called Thrive on Challenge. They have a podcast called the Coaching Culture Podcast. He's been a coach for 23 years, and he's also the assistant director for the Iowa Basketball Coaches Association. And I actually was introduced to or recommended to connect with Coach Nate Sanderson from Joshua Medcalf, who had heard of some of the really cool stuff that Nate was doing with parents and players. And so today I'm super excited for this conversation. We're going to be talking about transformational coaching, or as Nate describes it, it's using sport as a means for growing young people. So this is something that I'm very passionate about now that I am coaching again for the first time in 10 years. Anyways, I'm very excited for it. So Nate, without further ado, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm excited to chat.
Well, Chris, I appreciate the invitation, and glad we could finally make it work to connect.
Yeah. So tell me, I guess I would say, what is the origins of your, because you coached basketball for 23 years. What was your high school and or college, if there was any, in basketball, and what was the thing that drove you back or inspired you to pursue coaching as a job and career?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different origin story probably than most coaches in that I didn't play high school basketball or college basketball. My career tapped out on the 8th grade C team at Southeast Junior High School in Iowa City, Iowa. And, from that point on, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do other than I wanted to get into teaching. That was something that I went to college for. And they told me, hey, if you have a coaching authorization, it'll be easier for you to get a job. And so I went after one of those, and always liked basketball. I mean, I played a ton of pickup and rec and stuff like that, and played through college a lot of pickup as well. Watched a ton of it, raised on the 1990 Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan's dynasty teams there. So that was like where I really fell in love with watching and being around the game. But my first job, I was actually contracted to be an 8th grade girls basketball coach. And at the start of my first year of teaching, we're at new teacher training, and the athletic director comes in and reads off these 3 names, and he says, I need to see these guys in the hallway. And I'm like, how can we be in trouble already? It's like the second day of training here. And he says, look, I need a volleyball coach this fall for high school and for middle school. And you 3 guys are the only ones that have the license to be able to do it. So I started as the JV volleyball coach, knowing absolutely nothing about volleyball, never coached anything in my life. Well, fast forward to the end of that season, the head volleyball coach was supposed to be the JV basketball coach. She had a couple small kids at home, didn't want to do another varsity season. So we flip-flopped contracts right before the start of the year. So I became the JV basketball coach. And then in January of that year, the head coach was pushed out for doing some inappropriate things with players. And I became the interim head coach in January of my first year ever being in coaching, and finished that year at one of probably the worst jobs. I didn't know it at the time in the state of Iowa, but they were in the middle of a 33-game losing streak. We didn't win a game that season. We were 0-18. And at the end of the year, the AD came back to me and he said, Nate, we're going to open the job up again. And by the way, I was the 5th coach in 4 years in that program, if it tells you kind of how it was. So he said, we're going to open it up and we're going to try to get some applicants with some more experience. And I said, Dwayne, this program doesn't need somebody that knows X's and O's. It needs somebody that cares about kids, that's going to make basketball matter and make it feel like a family when we're together. Like, those were the things that we're clearly missing in the program. And Dwayne just turned to me and he said, you know what? F it. I think you're the right man for the job. And he walked across the football field and told the superintendent to hire me. And that's how I got into coaching.
That is crazy. I did not know that. Um, wow. So yeah, and then you approached it. You kind of had this passion for the transformational coaching, it sounds like from the beginning. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure.
What's
Yeah,
the where did that, like, did you experience that, or is it your parents, or where does, like, I mean, because I would say I feel like I have that innate desire or passion for life and just purpose and the meaning and why are we doing this and what's the bigger, the bigger goal here outside of winning or the season or whatever. But where do you feel like that was instilled in you?
Yeah, I think for me, it actually, my place of connection in high school was through our youth group. And, our youth pastor was the first person to see something in me that I didn't know was there in terms of leadership ability and, really connected with me in a way that just was different, And so that transformational experience for me didn't actually happen in sport. But when I look back at my life and, kind of the first person to really believe in me and see something there was Celeste Garcia. And when I started coaching, I thought, that's something that I can be for other kids as well, just obviously in a different arena.
Mm. So, you then, like, tell me what happened next. The your story has like an amazing trailer to the story. What did you then double down into, like, because you didn't have the framework of what you have today? How did that develop and grow into what you're doing now?
Yeah, I knew nothing. I mean, I hadn't even been coached. I played a couple years of high school tennis, but a lot of guys when they, especially I think in basketball and some of the bigger sports, like you start to coach the way that you were coached, and I didn't even have that to draw on. And in some ways, that was a major disadvantage. I think early in my career, the first 5 to 10 years, I'm still figuring out everything. Like not just systems and strategies, but the best way to put a practice schedule together and bus times, like all those things I just had never experienced before. So obviously there are people that I reached out to and I tried to learn from, and you have assistant coaches that have more experience that come alongside. But I think for us, foundational to everything that we've done over the 23 years I've been a coach has really been starting with relationships, and really trying to value the person that plays basketball and understand who they are and what's important to them and what their strengths are, not just on the court, but also just as a teammate and as a leader. And, in the same way, like I said, Celeste saw something in me, we're trying to help kids to discover their strengths and weaknesses, their character traits that make them a great teammate that hopefully down the road are going to make them great, you know, wives and mothers and friends and employees and citizens in our society. So that personal connection allows you to be able to coach them in lots of different ways, but that's really where we started even from the beginning.
Mm. I think I heard you on another podcast, and so I'll give you just a brief background of myself. And then and also listeners maybe have never heard this about me, but so I grew up, had parents, as both my parents were teachers. My dad was a PE teacher, so I got access to a elementary school gym basically, like, since the time I was one, or whatever, could walk, dribble, whatever. And so I grew to love basketball, and my dad was always at every single game that I ever played. Um, and then in high school, or actually it was in eighth grade, I had this idea of, like, I wanted to play basketball in college. And I remember telling my high school coach that, and he basically said, anyone that wants to play college basketball can play college basketball regardless of your skill level. We just have to find the place that you can play. And it might be a community college, but if you want to, there is a place to play. And then, like, how high up you go just depends on how hard you want to work and your skill and some natural talent and maybe height and all that stuff. um, but anyways, that was the first time that this coach was like, you can do this, you can play college basketball. And so I had a decent high school season or career, and then played basketball for 2 years at Carroll College in Montana. And then I came back to my old um, high school after graduating and coached for 2 years the freshman team at my old alma mater. And the reason I'm saying all that is that my dad was a coach, and coached for many of the years that he was teaching. And I always had been drawn to coaching, and I feel like I had or seen a lot of, like, bad coaching, but I was very obsessed, even with like minimal experience as when I started coaching, of the like the ability or the impact that a coach's belief in their players has in their players' ability to perform, you know? And so like I would do with this freshman team, we were super fundamental oriented and did, tons of form shooting, dribbling, passing, just like the absolute basics. And then we also did a lot of like visualization stuff with shooting, all stuff that no one had ever done. No coach had ever like done this with the practice, but there were times where I'd turn the lights off in the gym and have everyone no basketballs, and everyone was just at a imaginary free throw line, dribbling, air dribbling, and shooting and stuff. And so, anyways, we had this. That was a fun time. But then I like told myself I had to get a real job, and that wasn't even a job. It was just like a volunteer thing. But I didn't coach for 10 years, and I've been heads down in the entrepreneur world, building a business with my wife. And I've met all these amazing entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, sales coaches, and through on this Pursuit of Purpose podcast. And so this opportunity came up to coach high school basketball at a brand new high school that's 2 years old. And I was like, you know, I am running a business. This is my full-time job, but at the same time, when is a better time to coach? Like if am I going to wait till I'm like 50 and then like get into coaching? So I took this opportunity and it's been amazing. And I'm my entire like framework for this season is that I don't even like basketball. Like on my opening day, I told the players, I don't even care about basketball really. Like I honestly am just like, I love basketball. I dedicated 23 years of my life to it. And then I'm just like, whatever. But the reason that I'm coaching is because I feel like sport has the opportunity to teach us so many things. And I have drawn and applied things that I learned in basketball to my career, my family, and my kids, everything. So, anyways, that's the short of like where I'm coming from. There's more to say, but the reason I give all that backstory is I'm curious, do you feel like, because I would say I think I remember having coaches that I feel like were overly obsessed with the X's and O's, and we had 47 plays, and we were just doing all sorts of drills and everything, but there was very little um, emphasis on uh, like what type of how can we define or design the season so that we win the game that we are really playing no matter what, as opposed to focusing on the outcome of the given season. But anyways, yeah, I guess I don't even know if I have a question off of that other than where like what are you hearing, or is there anything that I said that jumps out to you that you want to latch onto and expand on?
Yeah, one of the things that when we do work with coaches and we are JP and I are, really focused on this idea of transformational coaching, right? And one of the questions that we ask coaches is, transformed into what? Do you take time as a coach to think through, okay, by the time my players are done playing in our program for 4 years, here are the things, here's the characteristics or the traits or the values that I hope that they've experienced in some way, right? So a coach might say, oh, I hope we have, great leaders in our program or they learn leadership skills. Great. So then let's start working backwards from there. They graduate as seniors and you want them to be leaders and have this self-confidence and ability to communicate. So how do we start systematically building that into their experience over the 4 years that they're with us, right? So there's an intentionality there. We often say, look, our objective is still to win games. I think that sometimes, there's a misnomer about transformational coaching that you can't care about winning and losing, and it does matter. And obviously, the higher up you go in your levels, that there's more and more pressure to win. But that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to change lives, right? And we actually define that in really specific ways of, here are the three things that I hope that our players, believe by the time they're done in our program. Number one, I hope they know that they were loved. Like that's fundamental to everything that we do, how we interact with them as coaches and players, how we encourage them and teach them to interact with each other is from a place of love. Like they're accepted for who they are. They don't have to pretend to be somebody different. This is a place where you can explore who you want to be and find full support for that. Number two, we hope that they understand that their value does not come from what they do with a ball. You think about the silliness of the game of basketball. We're trying to make a ball go through a circle. In football, they're trying to carry a ball over a line on the ground. Like soccer's trying to kick it into a box, right? Like those things are not going to change the world, but they provide a context for all kinds of things that, again, players can discover about themselves, right? Like, so when we have one-on-ones with players, and that's freshmen through seniors, we talk to them about how do you feel like you're having the most impact on your teammates? What are things that you're trying when it comes to growing as a leader? What are things that have worked, when it comes to having positive influence on our team or in the locker room or in tough moments? Like we're trying to coach them through the character development piece as we're experiencing the ups and downs of a normal basketball season, so that they can begin to see, look, my value here isn't when I'm a starter leading scorer, I'm coming off the bench, I'm a JV player, I'm contributing in some way because of who I am, and we're trying to help create conversations for them to figure that out, as they go. And the third thing that we hope that they leave with is a belief that they've been, made to have a positive impact on the world in the same way that we've hopefully coached them to have a positive impact on the overall experience that we get to share together, that they can take that out with them, as you talked about, into the world and look back on their experience in basketball and say, yeah, I learned this by being a teammate. I learned this when we went through some hard things. I learned this when I had to deal with an injury or adversity. And now 5, 10, 15 years later, that's still helping me today. Like that's the overall goal, but it's not at the expense of winning. It's just making sure that those things are in the right priority. And I think being intentional about how we coach them through that experience is really where the transformational potential really lies.
Mm. What coaches, like obviously you said you didn't have a lot of coaches to draw on. I'm sure you have studied and interviewed and tried to learn from and soak up knowledge from other coaches. What are the coaches that are like you've gathered or piecemealed this, like your concept or philosophy from?
I think a lot of my influence, it kind of goes through some stages in my career. Point Guard College is an organization that runs summer camps, and they're exceptional at what they do. I came across them when Dina Evans was the owner, and Dina would travel from city to city every week, just putting these camps on for point guards. And I got to work a couple of those with her, and that really changed a lot of my perspective on lots of things. But she had a real unique way of defining what leadership looks like in the context of basketball. She was really training point guards to be better leaders on their team. So I took a lot from Dina and that PGC experience. They later sold the company to a man named Mano Watsa, who owns it today, who I've become really good friends with as well. And Mano is in the business world as the owner and director of PGC, as transformational as you can get with his staff and what they're trying to build through their camp programs and some other things that they do as well. So that was a big influence on sort of taking this, I guess, missional vision that I had in my heart and figuring out what it actually looks like in basketball. And then, I mean, I read a ton. I've did a master's at Gonzaga in with an emphasis in servant leadership in sport, and so reading a lot of the just the academic stuff about servant leadership also had an impact on me. Robert Greenleaf and some of those guys. And then Daniel Coyle, his books are phenomenal. The Culture Code is one that I've drawn a lot from in terms of how we actually build culture, the practical steps for doing that in a group. That book has probably helped me more than any other single book when it comes to like building culture with teams.
Mm. Yeah, tell me about that culture with teams. How is that? How critical is that um in your coaching?
Yeah, it's where we start. When I am currently coaching at a school, Mount Vernon High School here. I'm going into we're in the middle of my fourth year here. And when I started, the year before I started here, they had won one game and they had been losing more and more games every year, went like 16 to 9 to 6 to 1. And that coach left. And so I got brought in after that. And the very first meeting, the very first thing that we told, the kids that we wanted to accomplish in year one is we want basketball to be the best part of your day. It wasn't about scoring more points or getting more stops or winning more games. It was, if we can create an experience that when you're sitting in sixth and seventh hour and you're looking ahead, you can't wait for class to get over because you get to go be part of basketball practice. that was like speaking Chinese to them. They never thought about it that way. They didn't look forward to practice. It wasn't an experience like that. In fact, they were, there was a lot of attrition in the program at that point where a lot of athletes were stopping, weren't playing basketball anymore. But that conversation really started. It's not necessarily what do we want our culture to be like, but it's what do we want the experience to be like so that you would look forward to this every day. And then we started talking about relationships and what it meant to be a good teammate and what would that feel like when we walk in the gym and what do we want that to be like when we're getting dressed for practice and we first come in and how we greet each other. And all of those things stemmed from that very first idea of we want this to be a place that you look forward to coming to every day. And we just sort of made that our foundation ever since.
That's so. How do you? I love that because I would say, uh, obviously, the player that loves what, or the person in life that loves what they do, in my opinion, is going to be more likely to have the endurance or um, the stamina to persist through hard times at a level that someone that is just feeling obligated in some way, or maybe doing it for someone else, or pressure from parents or whatever, is going to be not capable of. So I love that concept. What are some tangible things that you actually like? How do you are you telling players or asking them like, what do you guys want, or what would make this fun, or are you giving them suggestions, or how do you do that? Because I'm sure after doing this for 15 years you are like, okay, here's the six things that need to happen, but you want to make sure that they're weighing in and buying into everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky balance, right? I mean, I had come into it with 20 years of experience and a lot of success in other programs. And so you're right. I have an idea of like, this is what it should look like. And honestly, we started from a place of here are the three values that are most important to me. I can't imagine coaching without these three being the foundation of our program. So I just put those on the table to start. And that was gratitude, effort, and love. Like those three things define everything that we do. It's on the back of every shirt, second grade through high school, that goes out from our program. And we talk a lot about what those look like, and they look different from one team to the next. But I don't know how to do it without those things being the most important things. But what does that experience look like? That conversation is up to them. And, we do this in lots of different ways. I mean, we have weekly conversations in the classroom on different issues or things that we're facing as a team. Or, I'll give you an example. In the first year, again, we're trying to figure out how to have fun, when we're playing basketball. So we just asked that question: what makes this place fun for you? And they talked about both the relationships and what it felt like, and they talked about how we played on the court. Both of those things matter, and I think again, as we go all the way back to sort of my origin story here, when it starts with personal relationships, it's not just coach to player, it's also creating space for players to connect with each other. So, for example, something that we do at the start of every practice is we just call them triangles, right? So we've got 20 kids in the gym, and I say, all right, Chris, pick two teammates. Nate, pick two teammates. Macy, pick two teammates. So we get into these groups of three that change every day. They talk about the best and worst of their day, and then we give them a discussion, conversation piece. They talk about Christmas or they talk about whatever. Something might be in the news. And then we get back in our circle and we just go around really fast and they share something that they learned about somebody else. And we do that 3 days a week, and they're with different groups and freshmen with seniors and, captains with JV players. And so I think a lot of times coaches expect, or they hope that those relationships develop, but we really do a lot to create space for that to happen. And then the other thing that's probably the most significant thing that we've started doing here in the last 5 or 6 years is just having consistent one-on-ones with players during the season. So it feels to me like I have 15 ongoing conversations with every player on the team so that I know where they're at, what they're thinking, what they're feeling after games, things that might be frustrating to them, things that they're really enjoying, their perspective on should we make a change to the offense? Should we change the practice schedule? All of those things. I rely a lot on player input, but in order to do that, I have to have a lot of conversations with players and with our captains as well. And we kind of center around this word of, this balance between it's led by the coach, but it's really co-created with the players, and I think that's where, number one, we get the most buy-in from them, but it really comes down to them creating an experience for each other. And by empowering them to do that and giving them a little bit of maybe mentorship along the way, we've just really experienced some awesome cultural experiences year in and year out here.
I love so one like how often are you meeting with a given player in the course of the season?
Well, we'll do three formal, like, sit down schedule it meetings. So in the beginning, the first week of the season, again, I don't teach at the school, so I've got a lot of flexibility during the day. I'll sit down with every player for some of those meetings are 15 minutes. The older players, sometimes they're half hour. We'll do another round here. We're over Christmas break right now, so we'll do another semi-formal round here where I'll make sure I sit down and kind of do a mid-year check-in. And then at the end of the year, we do exit interviews with everybody, and those are, geez, some of those take an hour or two, depending on the kid and their experience and their role in the program. And then just in between those three checkpoints, it's 5 minutes on the bus. It's 5 minutes after practice. It's just texting a kid after game. Hey, give me two thoughts before we get to practice tomorrow. So there's a lot of really small check-ins, and then there's a couple bigger checkpoints during the year.
Mm, I love that. So, and I would imagine, yeah, I'm just thinking if a coach had done that to me, I would be, that's a super cool idea. With these formal check-ins, do you have like a standard agenda or top? Like I love the super practical, like you said, you know, uh, here pair up with two people and ask them, like use this question as the talking point today, or what's the high and low of your day, like those extremely tangible like things to just jump in and start getting reps at something. What other like frameworks or things do you have like that that are like anyone can take and start implementing right away?
Yeah, I mean, just doing a temperature check with how everybody's experience is going. What's been the best thing for you this season? What have you enjoyed the most so far about being part of this team? What's been your biggest challenge so far? What's your biggest frustration this week? Just those kinds of things where we're just trying to sort of get a feel for where they're at. Even the question of, like, just give me two thoughts after a game before our next practice has just kind of revealed a lot of things to me. In the sense of, like, a lot of times I'd say 60% of them are, I thought we moved the ball well and we took good it's just the general stuff that I might say after a game or that they might reflect on because we talk about it all the time. But every once in a while, you'll find something there that's really bothering the kids.
Do you tell play like every game you just say, hey, everyone text me two things before the next game, or you are randomly selecting players after each game?
It really depends. If it was a close game, like last year, we lost a really close game, like on a buzzer beater to one of our rivals. Huge crowd, it was like 1 versus 4, a big game. That one was pretty significant, and I needed to know how everybody was framing that game. And so after that one, I asked for thoughts from everybody. And it was either right after the game, during the boys' game, hey, come and find me, or shoot me a text before we have film, the next morning or what have you. Other times it might just be once a week,
Mm.
depending on what the schedule is and kind of how things are going, what I'm kind of sensing, if that makes sense. But I'm going to check in with everybody in some way or another, at least once during the week. And then our captains, which is a whole nother thing, but our system of captains, and meet with them every Saturday morning. And I check in with them probably every day, about something or another. So they help me to have a good pulse on what's going on in the locker room as well.
And you have two captains for varsity, two for JV, or two per for every team?
We have three for our program this year. It kind of depends. Usually it's three or four. And we do those a little bit differently than other people as well, in the sense that it's not a popularity contest. It's not the best players. It's not just the seniors or the captains. The way we do it is we basically give the team a job description and we say, here's the job of the captain. And so, job number one is, we talked before about those values: gratitude, effort, and love. We talk about a lot of them with our team. And so, we ask them, I want you to rank 1 through 3 who you think best embodies those values for our team. So, if Chris came in to watch our practice and said, Coach, what's your program all about? I'd say, well, just watch these three guys and let me know if you have any questions. Who would those three people be? They rank them 1 to 3. Then the next job is they're going to meet with me once a week and they're going to represent the team in those meetings when we're making decisions. And I tell them, and this is the truth, there is not a decision that I make during the season that doesn't get vetted through the captains first. And that's everything from lineup changes to who should dress varsity to scheduling. They're basically another assistant coach for me. And I tell them, like, they help me to make better decisions because I don't know what it's like to be a teenage girl these days and play for me. And so I'm going to include them in all of our decision making. So who are the 1, 2, and 3 kids that you trust to be in those meetings, right? And representing the team. They rank those. And then the third job description is kind of like the team mom. Who would you go to if things weren't going well on or off the court? You had a challenge or a struggle, you needed somebody to talk to. Like, we want the captains to be able to connect with people and help support them during the season. So who are those sort of more socially connected people? 1, 2, and 3. And then we just tally the votes. If you got a first place vote, you get 3 points. Second place gets 2. Third place gets 1. And then we kind of look at the data and say, all right, where was the clear break? Sometimes it's after 4 players, sometimes it's after 3. Last year we had a sophomore, junior, and a senior, and I've never had a sophomore on the coaching or the captain's council before, but it totally made sense when Courtney was voted on because that's how people respected her as a teammate and as a leader. And I tell them again, the captain's job, it's not a popularity contest. Their job is to serve the team. They're not serving me. They're not an extension of me. They're serving you. And so that's how we select them, and then we empower them to have lots of decision-making influence throughout the year.
Mm. I am so, there's so many things I'm like, this is fantastic. I love all this. Um, yeah. So I'm trying to think what other, of all the things that you have done or tried or, um, put into the program or not, what would you say has surprised you the most? Like whether it was thought it was going to be great and it wasn't, or didn't think it was going to have a big impact and it was huge. What was the biggest surprise?
I think when I first started here at Mount Vernon, again, having done it for 20 years coming in here, it surprises me in the beginning how uncertain kids are about expressing their opinion. So when I say, I really care about what you think, and players have no idea what I'm talking about, and then I just keep asking them, what do you think? What do you think? How's this going? What'd you think of that? How was practice? Like, I'm just constantly trying to harvest information from them, in part because it helps me, but also because it helps them to discover their voice. And, you think about teenagers never stop talking in class or when they're around their friends. Like, it just surprised me that that was challenging in the beginning. And it's always that way. It's that way when the freshmen come in for the first time, but by the time they're seniors, they've discovered maybe a place of psychological safety is probably what we're really trying to create as a coaching staff. And I there's a benchmark for me in terms of a relationship with a player. When the first time that they come and they disagree with me, I'm like, this is amazing, because they finally have the courage to say, I don't think that's going to work. Or what if we tried it this way? Or, coach, we're really tired. Is there a way that we can shorten up practices this week? Like, they know that I love practice more than anything else, but for them to find that place where they don't necessarily just agree or just say what they think I want to hear, that's a milestone. And from that point on, I know that I've got a person that I can really trust because they're willing to be honest with me, even if it's not what I want to hear, if that makes sense. And I think the opposite of that is true is even though they're maybe tentative and kind of figuring that out in the beginning, by the time they become upperclassmen and they really lean into that, like, they see that as a responsibility that they take really seriously. And I mentioned before, like, some of our exit interviews, my second year, I had an exit interview with a senior that lasted 2.5 hours, just talking through her experience from when I started her junior year all the way up into that point. And it was amazing. Like, I learned so much and just valued her experience so much. Um, Her first one-on-one with me was probably 10 minutes, when I first started. So that obviously, again, it makes me a better coach. It helps me to be able to coach them and mentor them better. But like I said, it's a surprise how little maybe they're comfortable sharing and then how comfortable they become over the course of time.
That's awesome. Um, are there any mindset like I feel like in general I've talked to a number of different mindset coaches or mindset authors. Joshua Medcalf is one. Have you used or do you do like any team reading or like a book club with the team? And have you used any of Joshua's books before?
I've read all of his books. We haven't used them with our team explicitly. Sometimes I'll send a book to a kid, in the mail or something, and if I know they're a reader or they're interested, or it comes up in a conversation, I say, "Oh, I read this book called Chop Wood, Carry Water. Would you ever have any interest in reading that?" They're like, "Yeah, maybe." I'm like, "All right, I'll send it to you." And so sometimes something like that, especially in the off season or in the summertime, we haven't done book studies, and I think the simple reason is because I just want to walk through the experience with them, and have conversation about what we're really doing and experiencing, rather than, I think sometimes when you read books, it's hard for kids maybe to connect, a leadership book with what's actually going on. I don't know if that makes very good sense. I read a ton, so I can always bring those things in, and we've done lots of that. But the modeling of the mindset to me is more important than reading of the mindset. And I'll give you an example of that. Like growth mindset, everybody says a growth mindset, you have to have that to be able to improve. And but how does a kid learn what that means in an environment in sport where everything is performance, right? The first question that every kid gets asked, when they get home or they get a text from mom or dad that couldn't make the game: did you win? How many points did you score? How much did you play? Everything is about what they did, right? Is sort of defining who they are, right? So if you're not careful, that can lead to some really detrimental psychological effects, right? If everything comes down to their performance, and as we said before, their value is determined by their performance, that's not great, right? Especially when you're building a program. So again, I go back to our experience here at Mount Vernon. They won one game the year before we started. We started 0-4 my first year here. And there was a moment that was really significant for us, and not just for our team, but even for our parents, because we shared it with them in our weekly email. But we had played a team, Center Point Urbana, who's ranked in the top 10 and been to state a number of years in a row, Division I kid, at least one on their team, and got beat by 35, 38, something like that. And in Iowa, when you get behind by 35 points, the clock runs continuously. Okay. So we're down, I think it was 38 points, and we've both subbed out. There's a minute 20 left in the game. CPU has the ball. This is the year before we got the shot clock. And they have a kid standing at the circle just holding the basketball to let the time run out. And I looked across at my friend Phil, who coached their team, and just kind of gave him a look like, what are we doing here? And so anyway, they ran the clock out. We go through the handshake line, and I get to the end, and I shake Phil's hand, and I said, "Phil, why'd you just hold the ball at the end?" And he said, "Well, a lot of coaches in this league get really sensitive about the final score. So we didn't want to try to run it up anymore or make it look like we were. So we just held it to pull the plug on the game." I said, "I totally get that. But our kids want to play basketball. And the only way that we're going to get better against teams like you is getting more reps in those games when we're
Mm.
out on the floor." And I said, the next time we play, if we're in the same situation, we want to play. So let your kids play. Let our kids play. And he kind of nodded and he said, "Well, I really appreciate that. Nobody's ever asked me about, to do that before." I said, "Phil, if I ever have a chance to beat you by 40 instead of 38, I'm going to do it." and, you know, and we, and we laughed. And I went into the locker room and I told the kids about this conversation, and I said, "This is where we are at, right?" So at this point, we couldn't break a press, like can't get through a press. There is no other game to it other than that. And that was our biggest struggle. We turned it over 32 times or something like that in that game. And I said to them, the only way we get where we want to go is that we have to turn it over another, I don't know how many times before we figure it out. And let's say that number is 150 turnovers. Then I want to turn it over 150 times as fast as we possibly can to get to the other side of it. So the only way for us to get better is to run to the opportunities that give us a chance to learn that thing. And that means even when CPU's up by 25 and they still in their 1-2-2 half court trap, that's exactly what we want to get where we want to go. And I use this scene from I think it's Batman versus Superman, where like Superman's having this battle, and Ben Affleck's playing Bruce Wayne, and he like comes out of the business building, and everybody's running away. And there's a scene where he runs into the cloud and the smoke and the debris. And I put that in our weekly email with our parents and players, and I said, this is who we want to be. When we see an opportunity to get better, even if it doesn't feel great because it's cloaked in failure, we want to run to that opportunity because of what's on the other side. Well, we go on the next night, we beat a ranked team and like went on to go 500 that season, and the rest is history. But that was a turning point for really defining. We didn't even use the words growth mindset. We just said the other side of failure, there's only one way through. And as soon as we can, find
Mm.
opportunities to fail faster, we're going to get better that much faster. And that sort of became the mindset of our team in that first year.
That's yeah. So many things that I like about that is we had a game. We played a team called Lakeside this year, And one of the things that's tough with a small school, because you guys, are you one of the larger divisions in Iowa, Mount
We're
Vernon?
right in the middle, but I've coached in the fifth largest school in the state, and I've coached in 1A in the smallest division. So I've gotten to experience all
No,
different sizes of schools.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's different challenges and whatever at each level. But for us, we've got 65 kids in the school. Basically, I think 80% of the guys in the school tried out for the team. And we have 12 guys, only varsity. There's not enough for a JV team. And so there's like, we have one or two players that are legitimate basketball players with like basketball ability. And then there's 3 to 5 like naturally athletic, and then there's like the rest of the roster that it's like we have to learn how to literally dribble, pass, and shoot, and that's all that matters. Like it doesn't even matter if we run a play because nothing's gonna good is gonna happen at the end of the play because we can't make a lay in or whatever. So um with that in mind, I'm like I completely agree and love the idea of just like the idea of like how many shots do you think you have to miss in order to become a good shooter? It's tens of thousands, and or dribbling or whatever, and just basically looking for those opportunities. But when we were in practice, we have our top five. When they play the bottom five, it's not like it's just you don't get the same level of competition that you do when you're in a game. So this Lakeside team, our strategy is to press the whole game. Like when you don't have a good team, my philosophy is you don't want to slow the game down. So we want to play a really fast, focus on conditioning and like transition points and shot within 10 seconds, and then we're pressing, trying to force turnovers, and like that's the plan. um, and when we press and practice and are practicing against our second string, it's like they feel great and they're doing amazing. But this team Lakeside was the first time that we actually had an opportunity to press a good team, and they were just eating our lunch and they were breaking it easily. And you look at the team warming up, and this team had more threes made in warmups than our entire team combined had made in their life. What I mean? Like it's like they're just a better flat out team. But and our senior on the team was like, Coach, we can't keep pressing them. At the end of the first quarter, he told me this, and I was like, Ben, I'm sorry. Like we're going to keep pressing him because this is the first time that you guys have had a chance to press a good basketball team. So I don't care if we lose. We ended up losing by 47, and he was thinking like we could have like done damage control and made it less bad and maybe lost by 30 if we slowed down. And I was like, I don't even care about this game. We're just trying to literally get reps against good people, and this is the first chance you got. So I completely relate to that and love that.
Yeah, there's a phrase that we throw around here. I just actually sent this to Jan Jensen, Iowa women's basketball coach, the other day after they took a tough loss, and that's the only shortcut to success is to fail faster. And I
Mm.
love that, and that's again part of just how we look at situations, just like what you're describing there.
Yeah. And you just have to embrace like, well, first of all, yeah, it's like what is it that we're afraid of, or what's the downside? And in that case, when you actually pinpoint, it's like it feels or it looks bad to people that don't understand what we're about and what we're trying to get out of this. Because like you said, they're just looking at the score. That's it. They're like, oh wow, you lost by 50. And it's like, yeah, if we would have lost by 10, would that have mattered? Like, no, you still have a loss on your record and
Hmm.
you didn't get anything out of it. So,
Yeah, and I think, you asked me that question before if I'm surprised by the effect of something. One of the things I think I'm learning more and more is that framing is so important. So like this year, for example, my short story at Mount Vernon, we went 500 my first year. In the third year, we made the state tournament and made the Final Four. This year, we're ranked number one in the state. So like we've had this massive turnaround here. And so expectations have changed rapidly from, we hope to win a
mm.
game to we should win all the games, in like 3 years, right? So this year we have, I mean, our first five is probably the best first five that I've ever coached, and we've had a couple state championship teams in the past. And so we loaded our non-conference schedule. So we're Class 3A, we played a top 5 team in 5A. We went to Illinois, played Bolingbrook High School, who's 3,500 kids, we're 350 kids. Like we really wanted to be challenged, but we had to frame that really deliberately about what are the opportunities that these different opponents provide for us in terms of allowing us to grow and learn more about ourselves. And so, we'd taken a loss to that 5A team in a game we probably could have won with a little more prep and a little bit more. It was our first game of the year, second game of the year. But by continually using that frame of what can we learn from this opponent, what are they going to help us learn about ourselves, it's become a reflection tool. Number one, like before we do our film sessions from the previous game, that's the question we'll ask our team in little small groups. What are you most proud of from the game last night, and what did they help us learn? And whether that's win, lose, we played well or didn't play well, we're constantly trying to get them to focus on the growth, right, that comes from being challenged by playing these better teams. And I think of anything else that's mattered that we've done here, like we've really created an environment of learning where kids embrace that. They look at that as an opportunity to make the 3A game feel slower. That's kind of how we've described it, by playing up against all these good teams. And hopefully that pays off in the end. But they get it, but they get it because they've caught it. And I think one other thing I'd add to that too, just this idea of growth mindset, is I think as coaches, and I think in general as leaders, we don't take responsibility for our mistakes and what we learn in the process as much as we should in front of the team or in front of the organization. So, I think of another example. We won a really close game 2 years ago against a conference rival, and we were up by one possession, 18 seconds left, and we had to inbound the ball like 3 times because they had all these fouls to get, right? So we throw it in, turn it over. Their best player gets a wide open shot. She misses. We don't get the rebound, jump ball. Now they get the ball under the basket. So there's like this comedy of errors over the last 18 seconds where they got 3 shots to win the game and missed them all. And so we looked at the film, we talked about what would we want to do differently in these situations. But there was a key moment where I screwed up and could have cost us the game as well. And I put that in the film and I said, look at this moment here. What do you think the coach could have done differently here? Well, if you would have called a timeout before the jump ball, then we would have been able to throw it in, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's exactly right. And I didn't. And that's on me. And that helps me to be more attentive to those important moments in games. I'm learning from this too. And just that humility of like, we're all in this thing together. We all have a role and we're all trying to get better. It makes it okay for us to acknowledge those mistakes because we're doing it too as coaches. And I'll do that in our weekly email with parents. We lost a game last year. Uh, we were ranked number one for a little while last year and played the number one team in another class at their place. Ended up losing by 12, but they really exposed 2 things that we were not good at. One was a alignment against our zone defense, and one was a thing they did in the press that we didn't have a solution for at the time. And I, in the email that goes out to all our parents, players, and fans and whatever, I said, here's what I learned because I didn't have us ready for this. And I just think modeling that is so important when especially with young people, but really in organizations. If leaders just had the humility to say, I'm embracing failure as well and looking to learn from it, man, I think that could unlock a lot of potential in a lot of organizations.
Mm, love that. Um, I just had one other. Um, oh, conditioning. How do you frame conditioning, or how do you use it or mix it in with the rest of your practice?
Well, we don't condition at all. So I don't know if that answers the question, but we haven't run in practice for years. We just play a lot of basketball. And if we want to do something to get in better shape, we play basketball faster. So instead of playing with a 35-second clock, we might play with a 15-second clock. So we're going up and down, or we might play in fours going sideways. So everybody's playing. Or we might play a FIBA 3-on-3, which is a pretty fast paced half court game. But anything that we do, for the sake of getting in better shape is always done in the context of the game. And, kids start to realize that we're sort of putting a mask on it, but they would much rather play basketball and get better by playing basketball faster than they would get on a line and run back and forth.
Because I was going to say, this is, or set, well, first question before I share something is, Have you ever encouraged or facilitated like journaling or like personal reflection that is guided or structured, that you're like, give the kid a journal and tell them what to write about or whatever?
We have. There was one team a few years back that, again, we took over a different program, kind of building from the ground up, trying to build their confidence. Weren't showing having a lot of success. I think we only won 3 games in that first year, but we were doing things better. So we had them do confidence journals, and it was just a front back piece of paper. They had to list 10 things that they did well that week, basketball related or not. I can't remember what all the prompts were, but 2 areas where they thought they got better, 2 areas where they made the experience of someone else better, 2 teammates that they were going to target in the next week, and a question for coach at the end or something like that. And so when we come together for our weekly meeting together on Wednesdays, they would turn those in. We'd give them a new sheet. The coaches would look at them and then either use those kind of to inform our one-on-ones, or sometimes we'd write comments on them and give them back to them. But we've done that a little bit, and I think it's great for just training their mind to be able to see some of the positive things, that they may not be seeing or may not be hearing from at home.
So I want your feedback on this, and tell me like, what do you like, not like, or thing, question for me. But one of the things that I want to be like the most conditioned team, just endurance, have the ability to just run and run and run and run. Um, but I also was like, I had this crazy idea of, especially with the team that we had, that I only have kids for, 2 hours a day. Like that's it. And there's 22 hours other outside of practice that are, the kids are doing other things, like whether that's getting good sleep, they've got homework, there's school, there's other commitments, they've got friends. And I was like, what's the biggest way to impact the other 22 hours in a day for a high school kid or anyone for that matter? And I'm convinced that it's personal reflection and journaling. So the one rule that we had this year is you have to journal and log that you journaled in this app for 2 minutes every day. So Atomic Habits by James Clear, he always says when you're trying to build a new habit, make sure that it doesn't last more than 2 minutes. And so every player has to journal for 2 minutes every day. And to start the season out, I still haven't given them, you have to journal about this thing. It's just, I want you to get in the habit of putting pen on paper every day when you wake up. And then obviously I've given ideas of like, what are you excited for today? What's going to trip you up today? What could you do to, preemptively plan to make that a win or whatever? And if you fail to log your journaling, then there's a consequence or there's a loss of privilege or something. And I was struggling to figure out like, what is the right way to frame this? And I, like in high school for me, it was like, if you're late to practice, the person that was late had to watch everyone else condition because you were late. Right. And I was like, that I kind of liked more than just the person that didn't do it has to run on their own. But anyways, Joshua Medcalf said, you never ever use something as valuable as conditioning as a punishment. Is never like, that is one of the greatest gifts that we can have as humans at any point in our life. And it should never be a punishment. And so what he suggested was when a player forgets to journal, they lose the privilege of conditioning that day and they have to watch because you didn't show up for yourself in the morning. So you don't get you lost the right, the privilege that every one of us has to go and condition. And so naturally, when I'm telling other adults this, they're like, well, why wouldn't kids just not journal and skip out on conditioning? And I'm telling you, the kids, like, they love it. They eat it up. Like nobody wants to. We had our solo senior, he forgot to on day 3 of practice. And I told him, Ben, you're not running. And since that day, he's been on an unbroken streak the rest of the season, because it's like everybody they want to prove themselves. And I also feel like there's something about the framework of just our team loves conditioning. We tell ourselves we love this. We like, nobody loves conditioning more than us. And we're going to run over teams because of how much we love this. So this is my last topic, but I'm curious, is there anything in that or an idea, modification, or follow up that you have to that?
Yeah, no, I love that philosophy from Joshua and JP and I use very similar language when we're working with coaches of just if a player's not giving a great effort in a drill, and you could use whatever, accountability issue you're running into, they just lose the privilege of, whether it's conditioning or practicing or shooting or, whatever it might be. Eventually it might be the privilege of starting, but at some point you'd like some progressive consequences before you get to that point. I think, for me, over the years, I've become much more creative, I think, in terms of how we make up for if it's a discipline, situation like that. The first thing that came to mind for me, again, we don't condition in that way, right? But like either, forcing that player to run the clock for the first 4 minutes of a scrimmage that they normally would be in, where they're still serving the team, but they lose that privilege, like you said, of being able to get up and down at the beginning. Or, practice gets out 5 minutes early on Wednesday and everybody leaves except for the person that has to do their journaling, or something like that, where like we're not asking for more time. We're not doing something over the top. We're not taking something we value, like you said, and putting a negative stigma on conditioning. We're trying to be creative, but also communicate this is important to us. Um, so yeah, I think that's great. And you've established conditioning as a key part of who you're going to be as a team. And so that's a great motivator, in the way that you're using it. I think the other thing that comes to mind, we could talk about accountability for hours, I'm sure, but probably my other biggest mistake over the course of my career is just jumping to conclusions without really understanding what's going on, with the kid. So if a kid misses when they don't journal, well, why is it? Is it because their mom was running late for work and they had to drop their sibling off at the elementary school in order to get to school on time, and they were actually doing the right thing, they just missed the opportunity and had to cut something? That's a totally different thing than my alarm went off to journal and I was like, screw that. And I hit the snooze button so I could sleep longer. Right. So
Mm,
being curious first is really important to me. And the way that we've kind of defined that in our program is our only rule when it comes to stuff like that, particularly with being late or missing, a responsibility, is as soon as you're not going to get the thing done or be where you're supposed to be on time, you need to text me. So there's a timestamp on that communication. And as long as you communicate with me before you're supposed to arrive for film or practice or bus time or whatever, then we'll have a conversation about what happened, and from there we'll figure out what's appropriate. So I think the kids realize there's, again, the adult responsibility we're trying to teach here is to communicate, right, without
mm,
necessarily making it something they're afraid of. And we kind of, that's evolved over the course of the years where everybody gets one late pass. I had a senior use hers for the first time in film 2 weeks ago, or for 4 years she's been on time. She took a nap in the afternoon and thought we were at 1:30 and we were at 1:15, so she rolled in at 1:17, texted me, hey, I just woke up, I'll be right there, I thought it was 1:30. I'm like, all righty, that's the one you get, you saved it up. You said at the
mm,
right time. And then after that, then there's a different conversation and they totally get it, and we don't have to run them, I don't have to wait longer, we don't have to make it a big deal. um, it's just, and it sort of becomes a running joke with our team now. Somebody's going to be responsible for reminding E to get up from her nap, and like it's become a positive, I guess, rather than 20 years ago. Excuse me, 20 years ago, I would have been like, all right, you were 2 minutes late, so that's a down back for every 10 seconds and blah blah, like done that kind of stuff. When,
mm,
again, the ultimate goal for me when it comes to discipline, now I'm just ranting here, but I every time I go into a situation like that, I'm thinking, how can I help this kid grow? It's not just about holding a line. It's not just about, it is about a standard, but it's not the standard for me, right? It's empowering and equipping. And what's the conversation for this kid to be able to do this on their own? And for me to be able to coach effectively in that place, I have to be curious, before I'm judgmental, right? The Ted Lasso line. But if the more I can understand about their situation, the better I can coach them in it and through it. And that's definitely made me a much more patient and relational coach for sure.
mm. Any other closing thoughts or remarks?
Yeah, it's just, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think for coaches or for leaders out there, I just don't want anybody to underestimate the influence that they have on others through their own life and example. We talk with our coaching staff about this all the time. Like these values of gratitude, effort, and love, we can teach them, we can talk about them, we can show them examples in film, we can use examples from previous teams. But if we don't demonstrate what they look like every day in practice, in every interaction with every player and parent, it isn't going to matter. It really comes down to who we are first if we want to be influential in a transformational way. And sometimes that requires, I know for me, like a lot of hard work, to get better, to be a better version of myself so that I can hopefully have a positive influence on those kids that I get the privilege of coaching.
Mm. What are three book recommendations? These are my last three wrap up questions that I ask everyone. Three book recommendations, and this could be related to what we're talking about. It could be the last three you read, the three you give away the most, but three book recommendations.
Well, I mentioned one, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, exceptional, especially for, I mean, it's good for coaches or leaders in any organization. He wrote a book called The Talent Code before that also had a lot of influence on me as a coach. But I love his work. We've gotten to have a couple of conversations on our podcast with him, and he's just exceptional. I think when it comes to books that I really love, like my favorite book of all time is a book called The Perfect Pass. It's a book about football that was written by a Civil War historian in South Carolina University, which doesn't make any sense at all. But S.C. Gwynn has written all these books about the Civil War and just stumbled onto this story of the air raid offense and Mike Leach and Hal Mummy and how they completely transformed football, starting at this little small high school in Texas and now worked it all the way through the NFL over the last 40 years. What I love about the book, this is the thing that fascinates me, is I love when people think differently and understanding why they think differently. And so these guys in particular, when everybody else was running the football 40 times a game, in the 70s and 80s, and they're trying to throw it 40 times a game and just getting crucified for, the way that what they're doing to the game of football. I just love learning about what they were thinking and why as they were, creating sort of this revolution. So, The Perfect Pass is a great book if you love innovative thinking. And then another book I love, and I'm a Bill Belichick guy, just fascinated with the way that he has led and coached and run the Patriots for so long. Very interested to see how this goes at North Carolina. But David Halberstam wrote a book called The Education of a Coach, which kind of traces Belichick's origins in football, kind of all the way up to about the midpoint of his career with the Patriots. And again, it just the way that he thinks and the influences over how he thinks about football and leadership and organization. It's fascinating. I love stories like that. So The Perfect Pass and The Education of a Coach are great stories as far as that goes.
Love that. I'm adding them both to my list. I love the yeah, thinking different or taking analogies from other and that's honestly like I'm there's going to be my podcast is a business podcast. And I love like there's so many things that I'm hearing in this. It's like, oh, it's all like good leadership, servant leadership applies to coaching, applies to running a business, applies to a nonprofit, a family. It's just like there are truths in the world that when you use them correctly and apply them well and role model them are just they are the tried and true method. So I love those examples. What's your movie recommendation for us?
Well, I'm glad you gave me this question a couple days ago when we first tried to connect because I've been thinking about maybe something that's a little bit obscure that not a lot of people have heard of. There's a movie that we used to use in our leadership curriculum when I taught a class here at school called Something the Lord Made. And it's the story of essentially how they discovered how to treat blue babies with a heart transplant procedure. The science doesn't matter. The story is fascinating because it's about a doctor that's kind of typical arrogant stereotype, know it all, and an African American assistant that he had, and the servant leadership lessons from that assistant and kind of their partnership as they're trying to solve this medical problem is it's amazing. So it's a period piece from back in the 40s and 50s, but it's got some incredible lessons and it's a pretty inspirational story as well. Something the Lord made.
That's awesome. This is why I love asking this question because it's these nuggets that I'm like, I never would have stumbled across that, but it's got an 8.1 on IMDb, which is phenomenal. And then lastly, if someone wants to reach out to you, what is your preferred method of contact?
Yeah, I'm probably not as active on Twitter as I should be, but you can find me there at Coach N Sanderson. And if any of your listeners want to email me for any follow-ups or any other questions or any help that we could provide, Coach N Sanderson at gmail.com is another way to get a hold of me pretty easily.
And then is your group like Thrive on Challenge? To me, I'm thinking like this is just again because I try to basically be as efficient as I can by just copying what other people are doing that is and giving them all the credit. Like I don't have time to reinvent things. I'm running a business and I want to apply good coaching practices to have an impact on kids and then get back to my family and life, you know. And maybe there's like I don't know, there's a part of me that's like self-conscious that that's lazy or I need to be more creative or whatever, but I'm just like that's how I operate. But there's so many things that you're describing that for me I'm like, man, I would love to have, I don't know if you, I guess this is a request or an inquiry. Have you like written down or do you have Google Docs of like these are the questions that we cycle through in a season when we have the kids part or triangle up at the beginning of practice? It's just like all of that simple framework stuff that probably would take you 10 to 15 minutes if you just sat down and did it, but just having it like here's the plan, follow it. How much of that have you attempted or even considered to like put into a package and either sell or give away or share with others?
Yeah, if coaches are interested in any of that stuff, just visiting thriveonchallenge.com. JP Nurbin runs the business and he's written a number of books. And JP and I do a podcast with Betsy Butterick called the Coaching Culture Podcast, where we talk a lot about some of these strategies, that we're using with our teams. But JP's done a great job of organizing a lot of these resources. He's got some courses for sale, both for just the education of a coach as well as the Captain's Council. He's got another one on playing time. And so there are some great resources that are very practical there for coaches. And then we also provide mentorship services for high school and college coaches, one-to-one mentorship as well. So there's some coaching involved there that we get involved with at the same time. So that would be the place to go. We've got a newsletter you can sign up for there as well. We write weekly and share podcast episodes and that sort of thing. So a lot of
And
resources
this
there.
is
And
tocculture.com.
correct. Yep.
Awesome. Well, yeah, Nate, this was super awesome. Thank you. I know it's a busy time of year with basketball being in the middle of it, but I'm very grateful that Joshua recommended that we connect, and this was fun.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. My name is Chris Kiefer, and my mission is to champion the relentless pursuit of purpose. And what that means to me is to be an example, a champion, someone that is in the trenches, working and showing and winning and trying and failing in how to pursue a deeper and more meaningful life with the people that I love, with my kids, with my friends, with our family, and also just be a champion and example of entrepreneurship and following my passion and doing what I believe I'm called to on this earth. And so if that inspires you in some way, please share this episode. If you want, like, subscribe, share, whatever, do all the stuff. It means the world to me to get this message and get these guests that I have out there. And if you're interested in any of the book recommendations or looking up other episodes, the movie list, you can visit my website, chriskiefer.com, for all the details on the show. And also check out the Boolean review software, as well as the Boolean automation consulting company that I own for home service businesses. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.